Why do you constantly appear so uninteresting, Juana? To be honest, it makes me sad to think of you as my daughter. It must be a difficult life for you to be 38 and still unmarried. A difficult life. Melissa is more like me than you. She is so charming and gorgeous. You two were born to the same mother, which is hard to believe. Perhaps the hospital switched you at birth. Do you not think? But Dad always said I look just like him. That's accurate. Back then, I should have chosen a partner more carefully. No matter how wealthy a person is, marrying a man who looks so uninteresting will result in a daughter who is just as boring as you. Don't talk about Dad that way. Unlike you, Dad always treated Melissa and me equally. Well, your plain father and you were two of a kind. Close buddies, weren't you? But unfortunately, he's no longer here. Now, there's no one left to defend you. I can hardly remember being praised by my mother growing up. I have an older sister, 2 years older than me, who is both beautiful and highly intelligent. To my mother, Melissa was her pride and joy, whereas plain and unremarkable me seemed to lack any lovable qualities in her eyes. I'm Juana Price, a 38-year-old single office worker. My sister graduated from a prestigious national university, joined a top-tier company, and married her older colleague at age 28. Her husband, Harrison Green, is a promising elite employee, highly regarded in his field. Harrison Green, nice to meet you. Just like my sister, he's flawless, and the two are viewed as an ideal couple, envied by everyone around them. Because Harrison frequently travels for work, spending more than half the year away from home, we've barely had the chance to meet and haven't grown close. My sister gave birth to her first daughter at 33 and had a son at 37. After her maternity leave, she returned to work, balancing her job and childcare seamlessly. Beautiful and diligent, both at work and at home, my sister is someone I deeply admire. That's why, whenever my mother compares us, saying, "You'll never measure up to your sister," I have no choice but to accept it without protest. Still, being ranked by your own mother leaves an indelible scar on a child's heart. My father passed away 7 years ago due to illness. It was just after my sister had given birth to her first daughter. My sister said she was glad our father got to see his grandchild before he passed, as it brought him great joy. People often said I resembled my father as a child. Moreover, my father treated both my sister and me with equal love and care. Melissa was studious from an early age and always sat at her desk as soon as she came home. Studying is fun. When I learn new things, it feels like my mind is expanding. I remember her saying things like that often. On the other hand, I struggled with studying and couldn't seem to retain anything. The idea of my mind expanding made no sense to me. With more knowledge, it feels like the future is opening up. Thinking that way makes the future seem so bright. Though Melissa spoke passionately about it, I could never see such a shining future. I never found studying enjoyable, nor did I have the passion for it that she did. Despite this, Melissa always devoted herself to studying at home and excelled in sports outside. She consistently won track and field competitions and served as the anchor in relay races, crossing the finish line first. Watching her, I felt that phrases like "gifted in both academics and athletics" and "beauty with brains" were made for her. There's a saying that heaven does not bestow two gifts, but observing Melissa, it felt like she had been blessed with not just two, but everything. So, somewhere along the way, I resigned myself to thinking that it might be inevitable for my mother to adore my older sister. No matter how hard I tried, I could never measure up to her. My sister was someone I admired, but as people around us often compared us with remarks like, "Even though you're sisters," it gradually became awkward to be around her. Though our relationship wasn't hostile, we weren't especially close either. Her talent and achievements were so overwhelming that she seemed like someone from another dimension to me. As I grew older, I began to think that comparing us was pointless. Even so, my heart was repeatedly wounded by the blatant sarcasm my mother would throw my way. No matter how much you try to get used to criticism or comparisons, it's something you can never truly adapt to. "Mom, could you stop comparing me to Juana? We're different people." "You're right, my bad. But can you blame me? The difference is just so obvious. I can see why you would feel upset." Melissa. Sometimes, when my mother would make sarcastic remarks, my sister would step in to defend me. But even her words sounded to me like, "Stop comparing me to someone like her." When you have an exceptionally talented sister, no matter how much you try not to think about it, a sense of inferiority inevitably takes root in some corner of your heart. No matter where I went, people would say, "Your sister is so amazing, talented, successful," constantly comparing us. It was only natural that this would happen. And my mother, almost as if she enjoyed these comparisons, would keep adding fuel to the fire. My mother laughed and said, "Hanana really takes after your father, unlike you, Melissa." When she said this, I felt an inexplicable discomfort. Being told I resembled my father made me happy. I loved my father dearly. But the tone in my mother's words carried a hint of disdain toward him, and that was something I couldn't stand. In such moments, my father always came to my defense. "Hey, enough already. Both of them are our precious daughters. Melissa has her strengths, and so does Juana." Juana's strengths? I have no idea where those are, though. I said, "Stop it." Even though my father rarely raised his voice, these exchanges became a routine part of our household. After my father passed away, we decided to let go of the family home. The house was old, built by my father's grandfather, and in disrepair. The windows wouldn't close properly. The second floor visibly slanted to the point where a ball would roll on its own, and the floors creaked with every step. It felt like it was only a matter of time before they gave way. Everyone agreed it was difficult to continue living there without major renovations, so we concluded it was better to sell the house and use the money to secure a new home. Though the house held many memories, my father had once jokingly said, "This house has reached its limit," so I believed he would have supported our decision. At the time, my sister and her husband were living in a rented apartment, but a plan emerged to use the proceeds from the house sale and their savings to build a two-family home for everyone to live in together. My sister offered me a choice, saying, "We can divide the money from the sale, and if you want to live alone, that's fine too." But my mother insisted strongly that we should build a two-family home. Under that pressure, both my sister's family and I ended up agreeing to her suggestion. Although I felt a desire to distance myself from my mother, I also felt uncertain about living alone for the first time. As I wavered, my brother-in-law reassured me, saying, "I travel a lot for work, so it would be a relief to have you around, Juana." My sister added, "I plan to continue working too, so having you here would really help." Unsure whether their words were sincere or just polite, I still felt somewhat happy to think they needed me. Thus, I decided to move into the new house and live with them. On the other hand, my mother blatantly said things like, "Honestly, the house would feel more spacious without Juana. Well, at best, she might be useful for babysitting." However, since my sister and her husband agreed to let me live with them, my mother didn't oppose the arrangement any further. Since my brother-in-law's parents had already passed away, no one objected to my sister's family living with us, so the plan moved forward smoothly. Now, I live in the new house as a single woman. It seems my mother isn't too happy with this situation. "How long do you plan to keep relying on your family home?" She's asked me multiple times. I managed to brush it off. My mother's sarcastic remarks are so routine that taking them seriously would be endless. Besides, my sister's children are absolutely adorable. My 7-year-old niece, Sarah, and 3-year-old nephew, Sammy, call me Aunt Juana, and are very attached to me. When my sister works late, I sometimes pick them up from daycare. Seeing their excited faces as they run toward me always warms my heart. This year, Sarah started elementary school. While I miss seeing her sweet little face light up like that, I feel comforted knowing Sammy is still young, and I can enjoy these moments with him for a while longer. So you're 38 this year? When do you plan on getting married? I don't have any plans at the moment. Do you really think you can get married with that face? Honestly, it's hopeless. Marriage isn't everything, and I'm holding down a steady job. Don't act so high and mighty just because you work at some third-rate company. I'm not acting high and mighty. I can't stand seeing someone as plain-looking as you hanging around. Honestly, I wish you'd just disappear. Do you really have to say all that? Sarah and Sammy are so adorable taking after Melissa. But with you here, I worry your looks might somehow rub off on them. Even though my mother doesn't spend much time with her grandchildren, she brings them up just to criticize me. Honestly, I sometimes wonder if continuing to live with my sister's family at 38 is the right thing to do. Maybe I should start living on my own. While I was considering this, my sister told me she was expecting her third child. Both my sister and brother-in-law, as well as the kids, were overjoyed. A third one, huh? Though my brother-in-law, like my sister, doesn't show his emotions much, he looked genuinely happy about the news. I felt happy for them too, but my mother's snide remarks intensified as a result. You're really just aging without contributing anything, aren't you? You're just wasting time getting older. I'm not exactly causing you any trouble, am I? You can't get married or have kids. Meanwhile, Melissa is already on her third child. People like you, who just grow older without producing anything, are nothing but a nuisance. Hurry up and leave. Sigh. Juana, why are you so plain-looking? Honestly, thinking of you as my daughter depresses me. And to still be single at 38, it's truly troubling. Troubling? What does that even mean? In contrast, Melissa is so beautiful and radiant, just like me. It's hard to believe you both came from the same mother. Maybe you were switched at birth in the hospital or something. But Dad always said I look like him. That's true. I should have been more careful when choosing a partner back then. No matter how much money he made, marrying a man who looks like that is why I ended up with such a plain daughter. Don't talk about Dad like that. Unlike you, Dad treated Melissa and me equally. Well, you and your ugly father were always close, weren't you? But unfortunately, he's gone now, and there's no one left to defend you. I couldn't believe how my mother spoke so gleefully about my father's death. And as if to twist the knife further, she continued, "You don't understand unless it's spelled out, do you? Not only are you ugly, but you're also dumb and inconsiderate. You don't have to say it like that. If I don't say it, you won't get it. Even Melissa always says having someone like you in the house is a nuisance." Is that true? It's the truth. The fact that you don't even realize it just proves how hopeless you are. While I didn't fully believe my mother's words, I couldn't help but wonder in the back of my mind if my sister really felt that way. It would deeply hurt me. Although I wasn't entirely free of insecurities around my sister, I thought we had managed to maintain a comfortable distance and a good relationship. I considered asking her about it, but something held me back. Perhaps it would be better to leave quietly rather than confirm it outright. After all, this wasn't really my home anymore. It felt more like my sister and her husband's house. It was only natural for both my mother and my sister to see my prolonged stay here as inconvenient. That day, I finally resolved to leave the house. But when I returned from work, My belongings were carelessly piled by the front door. What's going on here? Since you wouldn't leave, I decided to put your stuff outside. That's awful. You didn't have to do this. Well, you clearly don't get it when I say it, so I had no choice. Looking at my scattered clothes, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I felt pathetic and ashamed, picking up my things while wondering what I was doing with my life. At that moment, my sister arrived home with my nephew and niece. She must have picked them up from daycare and after-school care on her way back from work. Seeing me gathering my clothes, my sister looked at me coldly. What is this situation? The kids also stared at me, puzzled. My sister's gaze felt like it pierced through me, making me feel even more wretched. See? Isn't it better without Juana around? She's nothing but a burden. A burden. She's already old enough, yet she can't get married, can't have kids, and works at a third-rate company. She's completely worthless. Just having her here is a waste of time and money. Hearing my mother's words, my sister turned her eyes toward me. Suddenly, my niece came over and started helping me pick up my clothes. Aunt Juana, what are you doing? Sarah, you don't need to do that. Stop it. Pretty girls don't do things like that. Leave the garbage picking to the ugly ones. Despite the presence of my niece and nephew, I was on the verge of tears. Are you okay? I see. So that's how it is. My sister watched the scene unfold with a stern expression. Her silence made me wonder if she too saw me in this light. The thought made me feel even more miserable. I bit my lip in regret, thinking I should have left the house much earlier. Melissa, you feel the same way, don't you? I'm not needed in this family, am I? If people without productivity aren't needed, then I feel the same way, my sister said. Hearing her words, my mother reacted with delight. I struggled to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. I felt that crying now would only make me feel even more pathetic. Exactly. Anyone wasting money should leave. Someone wasting money. Huh? Then why don't you leave, Mom? What? Even my mother was shocked, and for a moment, I couldn't understand what my sister had said. I thought I must have misheard her and found myself staring at her face. She met my eyes and smiled warmly. It was clear she had meant exactly what she said. My mother looked bewildered, seemingly even more confused by my sister's words than I was. Mom, didn't you hear me? Wait a minute. What are you saying? It's supposed to be Juana who leaves. My sister calmly set Sammy down from her arms. Then, she looked at Sarah and asked her to take Sammy to their room. Sarah nodded with a sweet smile. Come on, Sammy, let's go. She cheerfully took his hand and led him into the house. After watching them leave, my sister spoke. You said it yourself, Mom. People without productivity should leave. That describes you, doesn't it? Are you joking? I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. And what are you doing now? Wasting money? Just eating and sleeping? Where's the productivity in that? My sister's words left my mother wide-eyed with shock. She looked almost cartoonish, her eyes bulging as if they might pop out. You don't help take care of the kids. You don't assist with picking them up from daycare. And you don't do any housework. All of that has been done by Juana. Without her, I would have been completely lost. Sis, that's just because she's a freeloader, isn't it? Mom, you're a freeloader too. Juana pays her share of living expenses every month, but you use all your pension on yourself and don't contribute to utilities or groceries. I'm your parent. It's the children's responsibility to take care of their parents. And besides, the money to build this house came from selling your father's house. That gives me the right to live here. It's useless to argue that. When we sold the family home, you claimed half as your inheritance. But this house was built entirely with the rest of the inheritance and my savings. Juana's rightful share was also used for this house, which gives her the right to live here. You, Mom, who didn't put in a single cent, don't have that right." "What?" Indeed, when the family home was sold, there had been a discussion about dividing the inheritance, but I had assumed the money was used to build the new house. At the time, my sister had offered to give me my share, but I chose not to take it, thinking it was better used for the house. It seemed natural to me, and I had assumed my mother thought the same. After all, she had been so adamant about building a two-family home. That's right. Dad's inheritance was divided, with half going to Mom and the rest split between Juana and me, so half of it is mine. But Mom, this house was built with the remaining inheritance and our savings. That includes the share Juana should have received. So Juana has every right to live here. You who didn't contribute a single dollar, don't. What? Mom, you claimed the entire inheritance as your share and didn't contribute to building this house. That means you have no right to live here. So, shouldn't it be you who leaves? It seemed my sister's words finally sank in as my mother's face gradually turned pale. She never imagined my sister would say something like this. My mother had always cherished my sister, firmly believing she would always take her side no matter what. To be honest, I was just as surprised as my mother to hear my sister speak this way. But upon reflection, it felt very much like something my sister would do. Since childhood, she had always approached things objectively, without letting emotions cloud her judgment. Her expressions rarely betrayed her feelings, making her emotions difficult to read. But she always made logical decisions. I remember hearing about how, as a middle schooler, she witnessed bullying and used her reasoning skills to thoroughly defeat the bully in an argument. People around her sometimes described her as cold and calculating. Even so, I had always been proud of her. Seeing her unchanged after all these years, I felt a deep sense of admiration. What? Are you planning to kick your own mother out? Have you forgotten everything I've done for you? What? Are you serious? Yes, I've reached my limit. It's not good for me or the baby to keep enduring this. Where am I supposed to go? My sister cast a single glance at my mother and walked past her without a word. My mother sank to the floor. As I quietly tried to pass her, she suddenly grabbed my leg. Even you're abandoning me? Who do you think raised you to this point? You're not, what? You're not my parent. My only parent was Dad. With that, I walked into the house. My mother stared at our backs in stunned silence. Later, my mother tried to speak to my sister in a gentler tone, but my sister completely ignored her, acting as though she didn't even exist. Eventually, my sister told the kids, "Grandma is leaving." Yay! That's great. What? Well, Grandma was always mean to Aunt Juana. I didn't like her, Sarah said cheerfully, laughing. Hearing her words, my mother seemed even more frozen in place. Children are incredibly perceptive, I thought once again. Afterward, my mother began living alone in a small, run-down apartment behind the train station. My sister quickly found an apartment and moved my mother's belongings out in no time. I was impressed by her swift and decisive actions. However, my sister is the one paying for the rent of that apartment. You would think my mother would at least be grateful for that, but she doesn't seem to feel any gratitude at all. Apparently, over the past 7 years, my mother had spent all the money from the sale of the house. I had felt something was off about her lavish lifestyle, wondering if my sister was giving her some financial support. But that wasn't the case. She probably thought she could spend her savings freely because my sister was covering her living expenses. She had racked up considerable credit card debt, so her monthly payments were quite significant. Most of her pension went toward paying off those debts, leaving her in a tough financial spot. She had asked my sister multiple times to let her move back, but my sister refused. She even called me, asking to borrow money, but I, of course, declined. Since then, I stopped communicating with her. One day, I spotted my mother working part-time at a supermarket. When she noticed me, she approached and demanded money. Seeing her still energetic reassured me in a strange way. It seemed she wasn't well liked at her part-time job due to her bossy attitude, and she lived a quiet life in her apartment, with no friends visiting her. That was likely the last time I would see her. 2 years later, I got married and moved out. Afterward, my sister and her husband gave me the full amount of money from the sale of our father's house. My sister explained that they had saved it so they could return my share when I got married. Initially, I said I didn't need it since I had relied on their home for so long. But my sister insisted, saying that because I had always contributed to household expenses, I deserved to have the money back. Once again, I felt so grateful to have such an amazing sister. A year later, I gave birth to twin daughters. I remained close with my sister and her family. Her third child was a boy, and her 3 kids adored my twins as if they were their own little sisters. I truly hope we can continue to maintain